This video demonstrates 4 different ways of creating this lovely snow on the Highland cow that I drew for my art club. First one is the Caran d'Ache Museum aquarelle, very sharp, slightly dampened, and it works really, really nicely. And this should actually work for any paper. This is actually on Clairefontaine pastel mat using luminance and polychromos mostly. The second one is the slice tool. So I like the manual pen cutter. It has this lovely chiseled ceramic blade and I just sort of scrape the pigment off. This could have worked really nicely, except that I'd used very warm pigments. So the actual colour of the pigments had sort of stained the surface underneath. So when I tried to kind of scrape the pigment out, it left it a little bit pinky. So it didn't leave it as a really bright white. So it didn't work brilliantly. Quite nice sort of faded ones, but it didn't work brilliantly, so I sort of discarded that one. The next one is the Derwent electric eraser. This little eraser is actually really fab. You press the button on and it stays on, whereas some of them you press the button, you have to keep it held down. Again, this one worked really quite nicely, particularly for those more sort of fatter, faded snowflakes. What you have to be quite careful about, particularly with pastel mat, you can see little bits of the pigment flying off. You've got to be really careful with the pressure that you use, because it can sort of actually make the pigment stick to the paper even more. So you just got to be quite careful with your pressure. But this one worked really quite nicely. And then combined with the museum aquarelle, actually created some really, really nice effects. So you could bring the museum aquarelle in over the top, which I think we'll see in a second. This clip was taken from a live draw along, so I've got a voiceover over the top of it, so you can't hear the sounds of the eraser. But you can see there me just putting in a little bit of the dampened museum aquarelle in there, and it worked really, really well. The final demonstration was using the Posca. It's not something that I particularly like to use, purely because I like to just use my coloured pencils. But this is a good alternative. It doesn't yellow. It is archival. You've got to be careful because it can peel off. But it worked really well. It worked really nicely. It gave a very, very similar effect to the museum aquarelle, but it's just that little bit easier because it's already damp and you don't have to keep on sort of dampening it and sharpening it. So, you know, if you don't mind not using pure coloured pencils, then this could be a really nice option for you. It's a bit tricky to kind of get the ink out to begin with, but, you know, it does work really, really nicely. Yeah, so these 4 different ways of getting the sort of the snow in over the top of the drawing, they worked really well. I would opt for the museum aquarelle and the electric eraser, I think, and that's what I did in the end with my piece. You can see here I've got all of the snow over the top of it. It was a relatively large piece, and I tended to use all museum aquarelle and a little bit of the electric eraser for mine, and I think it turned out really, really nicely.